Jason Lewis, ready to contribute, ready to fight for what's best for this country.
A man that I've known, a man that is tough and smart.
He's going to do what's right. He's going to do what's right.
Mr. Jason Lewis.
He rode a blazing saddle.
And thank you, Mr. President. Thanks to all of you for joining us on this very special video edition, Jason Lewis Live, at jasonlewis.substack.com. For all you subscribers at Jason's newsletter, thank you. Be sure and tell all of your friends and family to go to jasonlewis.substack.com and subscribe today. We do podcasts, we do videos. Most of it is text and newsletters, but it's sort of a wide array of things to try to keep you up to date from someone who's been on both sides of the mic, inside the D.C. swamp, as well as commentating on it for all those years on the radio, and now at Jason's newsletter. So much to talk about today on this Veterans Day, and I want to get to Veterans Day a little later. I had family members in the service from World War II to Vietnam, so we thank all of them. But I want to get to a little later on what our real commitment, the most serious obligation we can keep to veterans, should be going forward, and always has been, quite frankly. We lost our way a little bit, I think, but we'll get to all of that a little later in the program. But right now, even more important than war and peace, we've reopened the government. You know, it's interesting. I went through several of these CRs when I was in the 115th Congress, and I can tell you it is not the catastrophe for the country that people make it out to be. Now, there are, by design, some shortfalls in funding when you do a continuing resolution. Air traffic control comes to the forefront, and that is by design to get people off the schneid. But by and large, the world goes on. And in fact, when it comes to a $38 trillion national debt, which is the real national security threat facing the future, because if we have a sovereign debt crisis, we won't be able to fight any foreign wars. We won't be able to fund Obamacare or anything else. Every single dime will be going down or going to paying down the debt. And then pretty soon we won't be able to pay it down. And then no one will buy our treasury bills and bonds. And then the country will collapse. We'll have to completely devalue the dollar like some third world South American republic. And that's the road we're on right now if we don't start getting a handle on government spending and debt. Now, I've told you this many times before. When I got to Washington, the federal budget was about $4.2 trillion. That was less than a decade ago. After Biden was done, it was almost $7 trillion. The national debt was, I can't quite recall what it was. I want to say $19 trillion, something in there. Now it's $37 trillion. It is simply unsustainable, the path we're going down. And how does this relate to a continuing resolution and a government shutdown? Well, I'll tell you how it does. When you have a continuing resolution, and again, readers of Jason's newsletter probably know this, but you first-time viewers, this is why you should subscribe. When you have a government shutdown, it simply means that the Appropriations Committee has not completed its 12 bills, annual bills, which need to be done by October 1 of the upcoming fiscal year. The government's fiscal year goes starts in October for the next year. So we're into fiscal year 2026. So it doesn't get done. So if it's not appropriated, all tax and spending measures must start in the House of Representatives and be done by Congress, the legislative branch, nobody else. If it's not done, the government can't spend money. So the government de facto shuts down. What you can do to avoid that, you can pass a continuing resolution, which means that the government will continue funding. It's a bill. It could be a 30-day bill. It could be a 60-day bill. The one they just passed goes to the end of January. And it simply means that the government will continue spending on last year's budget, same level, through the continuing resolution, so that the air traffic controllers can get paid and the Appropriations Committee have time to do their job, quite frankly. And I could go on and on. If you've read my book, Party Animal, The Truth About President Trump, Power, Politics, and the Partisan Press, you know where I'm coming from on the dispute between authorizing committees and appropriations committees. It's total dysfunction. But be that as it may. So now you've got, during the period of this continuing resolution, time for the Appropriations Committee to finish funding for fiscal year 2026, and the government operates as normal, if you want to call that normal. But the beauty when it comes to the national debt is with the CR, we're saving billions of dollars because the government is spending at last year's current level. And you know what politicians do? They raise the budget, as I mentioned, each and every year. I mean, there is an argument to be made that in a perfect world, conservatives who are concerned about spending would just say, oh, continuing resolution, let's make it for the whole year. Let's make it the budget. Now, that's not going to happen, and it rarely does, but it's not, a total disaster as so many people would have you believe. I do want to get to, though, the so-called Obamacare debacle or the shutdown over Obamacare. Understand something, and this is how disingenuous the Democrats were on this. During the Biden administration, they passed this budget-busting Inflation Reduction Act, which was nothing of the sort. Inflation, as you know, was approaching, well, it was in double digits. It was approaching 20% if the Labor Department were honest. You'd see the massive spikes that would, quite frankly, dwarf anything in Jimmy Carter's era. But we had all of that, so the Inflation Reduction Act caused it, in my view, or exacerbated it. But part of that was to expand the Obamacare subsidies, the Affordable Care Act, ACA exchange subsidies, massively through, however, only 2025. Now, the Republicans voted against the Inflation Reduction Act en masse. The Democrats all voted to support it. In the IRA, they voted to end the COVID-era subsidies of 400% of the poverty level. Now, you're talking about $200,000, $225,000 for a large family who could still get subsidies because the pandemic was killing people, literally and figuratively. And the Democrats voted in the Inflation Reduction Act say, well, we can't do the COVID-enhanced subsidies forever. Let's shut them down at the end of 2025. That's what the Democrats voted for. So along comes the CR this year, once October 1 rolled around, and the Democrats said, we will not vote for a clean CR to keep the government operating unless you keep those enhanced subsidies going past the deadline that we voted for in the Inflation Reduction Act. Now think about that for a moment. You want to know how pure a political ploy it was. They voted to end the subsidies themselves when Biden was president. And then when Trump became president, they demanded that in a CR we legislate, which you never do in a CR. A CR is not meant for legislation. A CR is a continuing resolution to continue things as they are until you can get other bills passed under legislation. You don't legislate in a CR. Now, they didn't care. They said, no, we want to rewrite legislation within a continuing resolution. We don't want a clean CR. This was going to finally fall sort of under the house of cards it was, because under its own weight, this was too clever by half. And finally, as we know, this week, you had 8 Democrats or so defy Chuck Schumer and say, you know what, the CR thing isn't working. People are getting upset at us because we're the ones that shut down the government by not voting for a clean CR. Let's reopen it, and we'll address those subsidies later. And that's what happened. And that's a victory for Republicans standing firm. Although you had the usual caucus of 5 libertarians from Rand Paul to the guys in the House that even voted with the Democrats on this, which is bizarre to me. These are the people that think more gambling in sports is a good idea. That's the libertarian ideology that is irrelevant today. And I say that as someone who at one point embraced this, but it not only isn't real politic, it's bad policy. It's not libertarianism, it's libertinism. Anyway, I digress. I had to put up with those people when I was in Congress, and they constantly vote no against the party and then demand that the party embrace them. These are the people that think we haven't legalized enough pot, more gambling in sports with all the scandals already is a good idea. It is yesteryear. We are now a neo-populist party that embraces tradition, American sovereignty, and the whole idea that the police power of the states is there to improve our lives, not let more fentanyl in. Anyway, I digress on that, but I had to get it off my chest because, once again, these so-called libertarians voted against Republicans, against the Trump administration. And enough is enough. They're as bad as the squishes from the Northeast that vote with Democrats. They're all propping up the other side, and it's got to stop. And by the way, that gets me to a previous newsletter we talked about, and that's why Republicans lose on so much of this. You might recall during this shutdown, there was talk about undoing the filibuster. And the traditionalist establishment wing, I wouldn't even say traditionalist, the establishment wing of the Republican Party was aghast. Oh, we can't do that. I mean, that's going to save us when we have Democrat presidents. But, of course, the Democrats, as soon as they get power again, will undo the legislative filibuster anyway. Remember, it was Harry Reid that started this by abandoning the filibuster for presidential appointees to cram through Obama's and Biden's and so forth. This has been a huge problem amongst establishment Republicans for as long as I can remember, and that is they play by rules the Democrats have no intention of abiding by. They unilaterally disarm. And that newsletter I wrote, you can go to jasonlewis.substack.com and find it, just a couple of weeks ago, talked about using power when you have it. Now, Obamacare happens to be a perfect example of this, friends. Remember that when I was in Congress, we almost fixed Obamacare. But John McCain, at the last minute, threw us under the bus because he hated Donald Trump so darn much. And I'll never forgive the late senator for that, and I've taken some flack for that because I've beaten up on him on Veterans Day. Remember going all back all that years, that op-ed I wrote? Well, you probably don't remember it, but I wrote an op-ed blaming McCain for the 2018 midterm debacle, as well as not undoing Obamacare. And in this article I wrote, Obamacare's Revenge, right here at Jason's newsletter, I talked about the Republicans didn't use the power to undo things like Obamacare when they had it. Now it's coming back to haunt us. Because guess what? Since 2015, Obamacare premiums have gone up 92%. 92%. The average family under the ACA now pays $25,000 a year in health insurance premiums. Friends, that's not health insurance. That's prepaid medicine. You're paying more for lousy insurance premiums and lousy coverage, shrinking networks on drug formularies, on your clinics, on your doctors. It's horrible health care. And you're paying more for that than you did for actually paying for complete health care when I was a kid. When the doctor would come over to the house to treat my mom's asthma, Dad would write him out a check. He paid less for that than we do for premiums now. Who thinks this is a good idea? The only thing that can sustain it is what? More subsidies. And that's why the Democrats want to paper over this debacle known as the Affordable Care Act. But you know what? We couldn't replace and repeal in 2017, according to Mitch McConnell's Republicans. John McCain leading the charge because, that isn't right. And it would be too confrontational. The polls don't support us. We can't do that. And we can't undo the filibuster now because, when the Democrats get power, as I say, we might need that 60-vote margin. Except that the Democrats will undo that in a New York minute. Republicans need to understand one thing from the Trump era. Use power when you have it. What the Democrats understood, whether it means discarding all of the old rules. See, we're still playing by the rules. They've discarded them. What they understand is they're going to dig the country in such a hole. They're going to impose medical socialism, which is exactly what we've got when you've got 85% of the enrollees in healthcare getting a massive subsidy. And a subsidy, by the way, that's going to insurance companies. I want to get to that in a minute. But that's socialized medicine. And they implemented it. And it's still here. They understand that once you start a government program, it becomes very difficult to undo it. So they start as many as they can, even if it costs them an election. And it did cost them an election. You might recall they had to pull the same voting shenanigans in Minnesota for Al Franken as they pulled against me in 2020 in order to get Obamacare passed. They then lost the majority, but they didn't care because they got Obamacare passed. And you know what? It's still here. And we're fighting it.